It was the kind of evening that made even the hardiest souls in the frontier town feel uneasy. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples. Samuel Briggs, the town sheriff, sat on the porch of his small, modest house, staring out at the land. A man of middle age with a face weathered by years of hardship, he had grown accustomed to the quiet loneliness of his life. The rough wooden chair he sat in creaked under his weight as he rested his boots on the porch railing, absent-mindedly cleaning his old rifle. Sheriff Briggs had always been a man of duty. He had served as the law in this town for more than a decade, witnessing countless struggles between the settlers and the Apache people. He wasn't a stranger to the violence that often flared up, but his heart ached for the lives that had been lost. While some of the townspeople saw the Apache as nothing more than a threat, Briggs had always tried to understand both sides of the story. He believed that peace, although hard to come by, was still possible. But as time went on, it felt more and more like an impossible dream. The land around the town was wild, open, and untamed. There was a constant tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that things could erupt at any moment. The Apache raids had become more frequent, and the people who lived on the edges of town were always on alert. Though the settlers built their homes and farms in the shadow of the mountains, there were no guarantees of safety. Those who still believed in the law lived in fear, and Sheriff Briggs often felt like he was the only thing standing between the town and chaos. But that evening, something felt different. Briggs was drawn out of his thoughts by the sound of horses galloping in the distance. At first he thought it was just the wind, but the noise grew louder, and soon enough, the unmistakable clip-clop of hooves reached his ears. His grip tightened around the rifle in his hands. It wasn't often that anyone rode into town after dark, especially not without reason. He stood up quickly, his old bones creaking as he did. He had been a sheriff long enough to know that when something unexpected happened, it was usually a sign of trouble. Stepping down from the porch, Briggs squinted into the fading light. He could make out the shape of 4 riders approaching, their figures silhouetted against the dusky sky. As they drew closer, the sheriff's heart skipped a beat. He recognized them instantly, 4 Apache women. They wore the traditional dress of their people, and each one seemed as fierce as the next. Their horses moved with a fluid grace as if they were one with the land itself. Briggs had encountered Apache warriors before, mostly men, but never women. And certainly not like this. He could feel his pulse quicken. The Apache had been a constant presence in the region for years, and he had done his best to keep peace where he could. But he never imagined that 4 Apache women would come to him in the middle of the night, especially without any sign of hostility. He stepped forward cautiously, his hand resting on the rifle at his side, ready for whatever might come next. The women came to a halt in front of him. Their leader, a tall and strong-looking woman with dark, determined eyes, dismounted first. She was the most intimidating of them all, her expression unreadable. The other 3 women followed her, moving with precision, as though they had practiced every step together. "Sheriff Briggs," the leader said, her voice low but clear, "we've come for you." Briggs wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. "Come for me?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and caution. The woman nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "We need your help. We need you to lead us." Briggs's eyebrows furrowed. "Lead you?" he repeated, now completely bewildered. "I'm a sheriff, not a leader of Apache warriors." The woman's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "We have lost everything. Our families, our homes, our way of life. The soldiers and settlers have taken it all. We need someone strong enough to unite us. Someone who will protect our people. We have heard of your efforts for peace, and we believe you are the one who can help us." The sheriff's mind raced. He had never been more confused in his life. Why would they come to him, a man who wasn't even considered part of their world, let alone someone they would trust to lead them? But as he looked into the woman's eyes, something changed. He could see the desperation in them, the weight of generations of loss and pain. These women were not ordinary travelers. They were survivors. Briggs could feel the burden of their eyes on him. It was as though the weight of their plea was too much for him to ignore. The idea of leading an entire group of Apache women and their people seemed far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had always thought of himself as a lawman, a man who enforced order, not one who led a movement. But there was something about the way they looked at him, something that spoke to the very core of his being. A silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of the decision that lay before him. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves at their feet. The sheriff had always been a man of action, never one to shy away from a difficult situation. He had spent his life putting out fires in a town where danger was always just around the corner, but this was something entirely different. The woman spoke again, breaking the silence. "We are not asking for much. We only need a leader who will stand with us. We want to fight for what is left of our people, for what is rightfully ours. But we need you to guide us." Briggs felt his heart sink. He had always fought for justice, but he wasn't sure how to fight for something as intangible as hope. He was a man of the law, but could he truly lead these people, these women, toward something more than just survival? The world around them seemed to hold its breath as Briggs weighed the words of the Apache woman. And in that moment, he understood something he hadn't before. The law could only go so far. Sometimes it wasn't enough to enforce rules or protect property. Sometimes a man had to be something more. "I will lead you," Briggs said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. The women's faces brightened slightly, though the weight of their mission was still clear. They knelt before him in unison, an act of respect or perhaps a symbol of trust. Briggs stood there, feeling the enormity of what he had just agreed to. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but he knew that, for better or worse, his life was about to change forever. As they rose to their feet, Aleda, the leader of the women, spoke once more. "We trust you now, Sheriff Briggs. Will you stand with us?" For the first time in a long while, Sheriff Briggs felt a fire ignite within him. This was no longer just about the law or his duty to the town. This was about something deeper, something that reached into the heart of what it meant to be a leader. And with that, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he would not face it alone. Sheriff Briggs spent the next few days in a daze, trying to come to terms with the decision he had made. Leading a group of Apache women was not something he had ever imagined for himself. As a lawman, he had always enforced justice in a straightforward manner. He was used to handling disputes between the settlers and the Apache, often as a mediator in tense situations. But this was different. This wasn't just about law enforcement. This was about survival, leadership, and a future he had never considered. The women, Aleda, the strong leader, and the 3 others who had come with her, did not leave him in peace. They were at his doorstep every morning, ready to discuss their plans and their needs. They shared their stories with him, and slowly, Sheriff Briggs began to understand the depth of their struggle. These women were not just survivors. They were warriors in their own right, each one carrying a story of loss and courage. Aleda spoke of her family, how they had been forced to flee from their homeland after a series of attacks. Her tribe had been scattered, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. The soldiers had taken their land, and the settlers had built their homes over the graves of their ancestors. Aleda's voice was calm, but there was a fierceness in it that spoke of the pain she carried deep within her. "I once had a home," Aleda said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now, all that is left is dust. But we can rebuild. We can come together again, if only we have someone to show us the way." Briggs could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned in his own heart when he first became sheriff. He had fought to protect the people in his town, but now he had to fight for something greater, a chance for these women and the Apache people to survive in a world that seemed determined to erase them. It wasn't easy. Every day the sheriff faced new challenges. He had to learn to think like a leader, not just a lawman. The women taught him the ways of their people, how to survive in the wild, how to track an enemy, how to read the land. But there was more to leadership than survival skills. Sheriff Briggs had to learn how to inspire hope in others, to show them that there was more to their future than endless fighting and fleeing. One morning, as they sat around a fire, Aleda spoke of a meeting with the elders. "There are many who have lost faith," she said. "They believe we can never win. They believe the world has changed and we are no longer needed. But we know the truth, don't we, Sheriff? We know the world is not lost and our people are not gone. We will fight for them, but only if we have a leader to guide us." Briggs was silent for a long time, thinking deeply. He wasn't sure if he was the leader they needed, but he couldn't turn back now. The women had placed their trust in him, and he couldn't let them down. "We'll do what we can," he said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. But I'm not a warrior. I don't know how to lead you in battle. Aleda smiled, but it was a small, knowing smile. You don't need to be a warrior, Sheriff. You need to be a symbol. You need to remind us that we are still here, that we have not been forgotten. The sheriff spent weeks with the Apache women, learning their ways and sharing stories of his own. They would meet at dawn and plan their next moves. The women would often share stories of their ancestors, teaching him about the history and culture of the Apache people. Through these lessons, Briggs began to see the world from a different perspective. He wasn't just a man caught between two worlds. He was now part of something larger, a bridge between the settlers and the Apache. But as the days passed, the sheriff found himself caught in a web of difficult decisions. The town was on edge. Word had spread that the Apache were gathering, and many of the settlers were scared. They didn't trust the Apache, and they didn't trust Briggs anymore. Some even accused him of abandoning his duties as sheriff, siding with the enemy. He felt the pressure mounting on all sides. One afternoon, as Sheriff Briggs stood on his porch, he saw a group of settlers approaching. They were angry, their faces red with fear and frustration. One man, a farmer named Jonathan, stepped forward. "Sheriff Briggs, we've heard the rumors. We know what you're doing. You're siding with the Apache. You're bringing them into our town." Briggs didn't back down. "I'm not siding with anyone, Jonathan. I'm trying to keep peace. The Apache are just people. They have a right to live, to survive." But the farmer wasn't convinced. "Peace? With them? They've killed our people, taken our homes, and now you want us to trust them?" Jonathan's voice rose, and the other settlers behind him nodded in agreement. Briggs stood tall, his face stern. "I'm not asking you to trust them. I'm asking you to see them for who they really are. People who have lost everything, just like we have. If we want to survive, we need to work together. We need to find a way to make peace." The settlers were quiet for a moment, but then Jonathan stepped forward again, his voice low but filled with anger. "If you're with them, Sheriff, then you're no longer with us." The words stung, but Briggs knew there was no turning back now. The world around him was changing, and so was he. He couldn't let fear or hate dictate his actions. He had a responsibility to everyone, to the settlers and the Apache. The choice wasn't easy, but it was clear. He would continue his path, even if it meant losing the support of those he had once served. In the days that followed, Sheriff Briggs worked harder than ever. The pressure of his new role weighed heavily on him, but he never wavered. He kept meeting with Aleda and the other women, developing strategies for survival and for unity. Slowly but surely, he began to see the fruits of his labor. The women trusted him more, and the Apache elders who had once been skeptical of him started to listen. They agreed to a truce with the settlers, one built on mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And then, just as things seemed to be settling down, word came that a large military force was moving toward the town. The Apache knew it was only a matter of time before they would be forced to confront their enemies once again. Sheriff Briggs stood at the edge of the town, looking out toward the horizon. The challenge was clear. He wasn't just leading a small group of women anymore. He was leading an entire movement, a struggle for survival and for a future where both Apache and settlers could live side by side. But even as the weight of that responsibility pressed down on him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly fighting for something worth fighting for. He wasn't just a sheriff anymore. He was a leader, guiding the way forward.